All right, we are live.
All right, welcome everybody to the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee on Friday, January 31st. We are here today to learn about FirstNet. So we're going to go around the room, around the table, and introduce ourselves. And our committee assistant will do the same. And then we always ask all the guests who are in the room to introduce themselves and say who they're representing. That's our carbon dioxide detector. Sorry about that. And then we'll have you guys come up and introduce yourselves for the record, or whoever's testifying. So, okay. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from Bennington 4, Manchester.
Scott Campbell from St. John's Bay, Albany, Essex.
Richard Bailey, Memorial 2, reside in Hyde Park.
Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Vera Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Klepner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Marcy Millian, Wyndham 2.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant, Williston, Vermont.
All right. Yes.
Ryan Clark with AT&T.
Great.
Nick Sherman, I'm with Leonine. We're a government relations firm here in Montpelier, and we represent AT&T.
Great.
Steve Whitaker, advocate. Dave Batesy, Deputy Commissioner of Public Safety.
Great.
Rosemary Gretkowski, General Counsel, Department of Public Safety.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for being here. And to our witness. Who's our witness?
Thank you for inviting us. I'm Corey Chase. I'm the Director of Radio Technology Services at the Department of Public Safety.
Great. Would you like to scoot up, or you can?
Yeah.
Where you? Okay.
I sat where the
Okay. I wasn't sure
I
what was
felt like
going
I was
on.
being stuck in the corner.
All right. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah.
So
Do you have slides to share?
we do have slides.
Yeah.
Super.
So I'll wait for Jack to clean that up.
Great. And we have, I don't know how much time your presentation will take.
Shouldn't be long.
Well, we're not in a hurry, actually.
Okay.
So, I'd say we have up to an hour. If folks have questions or you want to elaborate, we are on a learning journey here in our committee. So.
Great. Excuse me.
I'm young.
Okay.
I was just noticing if recording, another recording. Nice.
Okay. So again, thank you for inviting us. I'm the Director of Radio Technology Services. So I thought I saw the invitation to learn about FirstNet, and I thought it best to start with a kind of description of what we do at Public Safety and how FirstNet integrates into that, the emergency communication services. So first off, move to the next slide, please. So RTS is a division within the Department of Public Safety, and I think we're sort of hidden because it's not something that's in the news very often, but it's an important part of the way that the state addresses first responders generally. So we have a network of many tower sites around the state, mostly on top of mountains. We maintain these LMR networks. I'll get into what an LMR network is, but we maintain networks for not only Department of Public Safety, but also for AOT and ANR. So though representatives from all three different state departments, agencies rely on the services that my division provides. So we maintain not only the radios on the mountaintops, but also the individual mobile radios that first responders and AOT and Fish and Wildlife and the wardens use. Our networks, the state networks, are used not only by the state, but also by many other agencies around the state. So not for instance, county sheriffs or local first responders in different parts of the state rely on the networks and capabilities that the state provides. We have we have 40 tower sites around the state that we maintain. And again, many of these facilities are used by not only us, but by other first responder agencies. These 40 facilities around the state are connected by microwave networks. So what that means is that our individual towers, for instance, on Mount Mansfield and on Killington, are connected to each other with a wireless connection. What that means is that we are able to withstand outages that might occur in the public network. For instance, if there's a big outage that goes on in Burlington or in Rutland, that won't affect our ability to provide radio communications to our first responders because our network is not reliant on the public networks. When I say public, I mean services for the public as opposed to publicly owned networks for the state. With our state microwave network is a private network. We don't rely on the public, on the commercial providers. And it's built on redundant rings, so that what a ring means is that we can lose connection between every site, and every one of our tower sites has multiple wireless paths. So we lose, if we, for instance, we have a major problem on one tower, there's another connection from that tower to get back to dispatch. In addition to the statewide network, my division also maintains the telephone service for all of the Department of Public Safety. So you probably you're the digital committee, you probably know the Agency of Digital Services, ADS. ADS maintains the telephone service for all state employees all across the entire enterprise, thousands of lines. They do not maintain the telephone network for our division because our Department of Public Safety, because we maintain service for the dispatch answering service points. And I'll get to that in a minute, but it's the distinction that our department is different from the rest of state government because we don't rely on ADS for our telephone service. We also maintain an interoperability system called VCOM. VCOM is a set of channels that are assigned by the federal government to that can be used by any first responder around the country. So that means that it's a channel you can turn your radio to this channel and talk to somebody else from a different division, a different state, anywhere else that has this channel. So you can talk in interoperability between. Say you have a big fire and you have a firefighter that comes from New York State, they can switch to that channel and you both interoperate using the same radios. Next slide, please.
Wait.
Yes,
Sorry.
please. I'll get into more. This was a brief introduction about my division. I'll get into details about the rest of it.
I just wanted to do an acronym check.
Yes.
If you could just go back check.
Yeah.
SOV, State of Vermont.
State of Vermont.
LMR, Land Mobile Radio. PSAPs.
PSAPs is a public safety answering point. That's where 911 calls are received.
Okay, DPS we know, VCOM. Okay, sorry, thanks.
Yeah.
Just wanted
Yeah,
to.
no, it's good. This committee definitely should know. I'm sorry I didn't explain that in the jargon. It's easy to get lost in jargon when you're in technology.
Well, DPS in this case means Department of Public Safety.
Yes.
Not service. Because we hear about service all the time.
Yes, I personally trip over that a lot
Yeah.
because I spent many years working for the PSD. And
Yes.
even now, I still trip over.
Well, so, yes.
Yes.
Many of us try to make it PSD instead of.
Right.
So there's a distinction there.
But I formerly worked for the Public Service Department, PSD.
Okay.
So next slide. So let's start talking generally about public safety communications. What are the tools that a first responder might use to communicate either with another first responder or importantly with dispatch? So the tool has been used for decades and is still today the primary tool for first responders is this LMR, Land Mobile Radio. So really, that's basically what we all colloquially refer to as a walkie-talkie. It's a handheld device that you push the button and you talk, and somebody else can hear you talking. They're as simple as the little family ones that they sell at Walmart. You can push the button and talk to anybody who's on that frequency. We use much more sophisticated, more powerful, and importantly, more robust and reliable systems than you would buy at Walmart. But still, the basic idea is that it's a device you push the button and talk, and people on that channel can hear you. Another thing that you can use for first responders do use is mobile wireless service. There are many different companies that provide mobile wireless service. AT&T is one, Verizon, T-Mobile, they all offer mobile wireless service. The distinction is pretty significant. LMR is a push to talk. It's built for simplicity and for the system to be hardened, easy to use for a first responder in an emergency situation. Mobile wireless service is vastly more capable. It's built and designed for data communications. You can send lots of information over a device, but your device is typically a pretty complicated computer, a smartphone. It's not really designed for first responders to use in an emergent situation. There are applications, so we all know what a smartphone is. An application that you install on your smartphone allows you to do all kinds of things with that smartphone. You can use email, you can use texting. There are applications that are designed for first responders on an application. You can use an application and everybody logs into the same application. Say, for instance, Chair, you and I both install an app on our phone, like for instance, Facebook Instant Messenger, and we can both communicate on a private channel over that application. There are many applications that are designed for first responders, and that's a long conversation about that, but that is a technology that's available. You can use the internet. So a first responder might use internet from a computer. They might use it. There are different ways of communicating with the internet. Many first responders use pagers, even today. There are people that carry pagers, and when a dispatch agency, an agency needs to call first responders, most of whom in Vermont are volunteers, they can page them and tell them, the page says, you need to call in, you need to show up, you need to do something. Many first responders have satellite telephones. There are different kinds of satellite telephones. Some of them are as simple as a device that looks like a cell phone. Some of them are more complicated and look like an old car phone that just got this big box and you talk on it. Some of them have satellite dishes. There are all kinds of different telephones. The state has many satellite telephones. Most of these are reserved for really super emergency problems when the state networks or the telephone networks are down. Many of our key employees in the state have a satellite telephone assigned to them. And sort of a last resort for first responders is ham radio. What we refer to as ham radio, it's really just amateur radio. The FCC has designated frequencies that are built for amateur use. These radios are designed to propagate using radio channels that go a very long distance. Like you can talk to somebody in Japan if you're lucky. One of my employees is an avid amateur radio operator. He participates in these competitions over the course of a weekend to see how many different people and how many different states you can talk to. And there's no end of the ways that humans can come up with to entertain themselves with this stuff. But we rely on ham radio, amateur radio, as a last ditch sort of effort. If everything else fails, we have amateur radios installed in our operations center so that we can get in touch with other amateur radio people and get communications if all else fails.
Did you say what HAM stands for?
I don't know. I inserted that because most people refer to it as ham, but it's really referred to by the FCC as amateur radio. Yeah.
I was Googling and unable to
Yes.
find it.
I think the H stands for the high frequency.
Okay.
Yes, I believe you're right. I believe it's high. It is HF, so it's high frequency amateur radio.
There you go.
Next slide. So LMR, Land Mobile Radio. You sure you don't want this slide?
No, we'll talk, you're coming up, we'll keep going, we'll get into this later.
Okay. All right, good. So what are the features of LMR? I mentioned that LMR is a key tool used by us, it's used by all first responders. It was designed and has been for decades and remains the key tool for voice communications used by first responders. The important part of that is that it's a one-to-many transmission. Unlike a telephone call is a one-to-one. So I call you, Chair, you and I speak, nobody else can hear us. You and I are on a private communication. LMR is designed to be a one-to-many situation. So somebody in dispatch, somebody at the state police. This picture is from the brand new state police building in Williston. It's a beautiful, brand new building. I encourage everybody to, if you have a chance, to go. Maybe I shouldn't speak out of turn,
By all
but
means.
it is truly amazing. I just need to pause and say, I've been in telecommunications for my career. I've been in many different places. Spending a little while in that building and seeing the work that my colleagues at VSP, Vermont State Police, the work that they do in that building is truly, truly amazing. That they take 911 calls, and who knows what's going to what's going to happen, and the stress that places trying to help those people, and then also try to respond to find the kind of help that they might need. It's quite something to see. At any rate, the LMR features, what this means is that you have, as a first responder, you have immediate connection to someone. So if you're a first responder and you need help, you push the button and you're talking and somebody's listening. The first responder, the term of art is a telecommunicator. The Vermont State Police have telecommunicators that are sitting in these, not sitting, but they're working in these, the PSAPs, the public safety answering points. Vermont State Police has a staff of, I believe I shouldn't speak out of turn. They have a competent staff that are in both of these two PSAPs, one in Westminster and the other in Williston. They're there 24/7, and when a first responder needs somebody, they push the button and somebody's listening. They have an immediate connection to a dispatcher to ask for help. And the converse is also true when a telecommunicator in the PSAP, they push the button to transmit, they know that there are first responders in the field that are listening, that they can help direct somebody to the emergent situation. LMR is also used tactically between two different first responders. So you have one first responder in the field, and dispatch says, we have a problem, we need you to go to this address. The first responder goes there, and they need to talk to somebody else who's also at the field. They can push the button, and everybody on that channel, they all can communicate on the same channel to talk to each other. Next slide. So LMR technologies, the LMR towers, they're typically installed on mountaintops. So we in Vermont, my division maintains 40 sites. Most of those, some of those are not necessarily LMR towers, but we've got 33, I believe, that have LMR transmission. They're typically up on top of mountains, and they've got the best view. Not necessarily the best for aesthetics, having mountain towers on mountaintops, but that's public safety is important, and the higher you can get, the better range you've got, the better coverage you got. So you can provide service to more territory, more people with a fewer number of towers. As in contrast, so the key contrast here is that LMR, we've got, as I said, approximately 30 towers that have LMR service in the state. For context, a mobile wireless service needs probably 10 times that number of towers, because when I say mobile wireless, I mean cellular service. Cellular service needs 10 times more towers because it's a different technology, and it's focused not on providing one voice channel to lots of people throughout the whole territory. It's meant on mobile wireless service, cellular service is designed to provide high-speed data to everybody who wants to watch everything from cat videos to checking their email, doing Facebook, and streaming this service that we're doing right now. That's a fundamentally different technology. So there are two different frequencies that we use for LMR. We use VHF and UHF. VHF, very high frequency, as opposed to high frequency, which is, as you mentioned, the amateur radio. So high frequency, very high frequency, and ultra high frequency. VHF is used, it's got for LMR service, it's got the higher range as opposed to VHF and UHF. VHF has higher, it has a larger range. It can go further. So you need fewer towers to cover the state with LMR using the VHF channel. However, it's not, let me pause there. VHF provides the largest coverage with the fewest towers, and it is used in Vermont primarily by fire and EMS. So in Vermont, we the state do not maintain the local fire departments. They run their own networks, and emergency management also manages do their own networks. That they tend to use VHF channels. We for Vermont State Police, we use UHF channels. UHF requires more tower sites than VHF, but it is used by state police primarily because it's got better building penetration than VHF. So VHF radios are used by, as I said, fire and EMS. They've got better coverage around the state, but they don't work as well inside buildings, whereas UHF that are used by state police do. One very important thing about these VHF and UHF channels, there's a certain band of frequencies that the FCC has allocated for VHF and UHF LMR use. Almost all of the frequencies in that band are used. There's basically no additional channels that you can assign. So if you've got a town that wants to put up a new radio to do their plow truck drivers or something, or a town wants to improve its ambulance service, there's very few available additional channels. Almost all of them have been used for something.
So what happens then?
You get creative. You try to use the same channel for two different things. You try to, try and find some way to be more efficient with the use of the channels that you have.
Yeah.
I've heard on the ground some frustration with the systems not talking to each other when you have police and fire and other elements.
Yes, that is a big problem.
And how are we working with that big problem?
The legislature has created something called the Public Safety Communication Task Force. That task force is chaired by Commissioner Jennifer Morrison and the DPS commissioner, and co-chair Barb Neal from the E911 board. I'm not really prepared to talk about the work of that commission. That commission is its own thing, and it's a
Notes.
Thank you.
We can have them in.
Thank you.
That is a complicated question.
Okay.
So when discussing LMR, most radios are either VHF or UHF. You can buy radios that are capable of both UHF and VHF, but they're more expensive because they have to do more. We typically equip Vermont State Police with either dual band radios, or many of the cruisers are set up with both a UHF radio and a VHF radio, so they can use the UHF radio to talk to us at dispatch, and they can use the VHF radio to talk to first responders who might not have a UHF radio. So for instance, if to address your problem, your concern, if Vermont State Police goes to an incident and there are other first responders there that are using VHF, Vermont State Police can talk to them using the VHF radios, even if that fire department doesn't have a UHF radio to talk to us. Next channel, next slide. So this is just more explanation about the difference between VHF and UHF. No, excuse me. Sorry, it's hard having the slide behind you and having to turn around for that. In addition to the difference between UHF and VHF, there are two basic different kinds of radios, two types of radios. On the left, you see the picture on the bottom. Those are the mobile radios that are installed. Mobile is the term of art here, but mobile radios are installed in vehicles. They have a 100-watt transmit power, so they can. That's the same kind of power that's on the transmitter that's on the mountaintop. So they can transmit a very long ways. They've got great coverage around the state in the mobile devices in the vehicles. On the right-hand side, we have the portable device. So a portable device is what we think of colloquially as a portable device, like a walkie-talkie. Typically, the first responders from State Police, they use these portable devices on a belt. You keep the portable radio on your belt, and you use a lapel mic that's shown here. He's got a microphone. You push the button to talk on that, and you can hear the response back from other responders or the dispatch through the speaker on the microphone, speaker on the lapel mic. Next slide. So the Vermont State Police, the way that we have designed the Vermont State Police Network, we have 10 Vermont State Police barracks. The way that Vermont has structured Vermont State Police, each of these areas, they roughly align with counties, have each of these territories is an individual barracks. It's managed by a particular commanding officer in Vermont State Police, and they dispatch, they maintain their staff on a barracks level, and they do people are on duty based on the barracks territory, and they respond to incidents based on the barracks territory. So each one of these 10 barracks territories has an individual UHF channel. So the logic here is that you have a person sitting in a dispatch center, one of the dispatch centers in Williston or Westminster. So Troop A is Williston, all of those territories in the north that are A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's some person sitting at the desk in the dispatch center in Williston, and they're focused continually on listening to that channel. So there's A5 in the far northeast, A5. There's a person sitting in the dispatch center in Williston listening to that channel, and they're listening 24/7. And if anybody calls on that channel and a first responder needs help, they're there to try and help that person. Conversely, they're there to talk to whoever's on duty and say somebody called in Newport and they need assistance, and that person is there. They'll push the button and relay that to whoever's on duty to send them to respond to that incident. So this map also shows the 35 primary LMR tower sites where they're located around the state. My division is responsible for maintaining these tower sites. That is not a simple task. These towers are unlike cell towers that are located. I don't mean to say that cell towers are easy to maintain. That is its own task. Brian, I'm sure that AT&T can attest to that. But our towers are located on the summits. So we have a tower on the summit of Mount Mansfield, a summit of Killington, Burke Mountain, Jay, Equinox, Scottney, and of course, Murphy's Law is there, alive and well. And when we have an ice storm, something is going to go wrong. When it does, whenever there's a storm, something does go wrong. The antennas get coated in ice. They lose their power. We have to send a technician up to try to figure out how to get the ice off the antenna without breaking it. And of course, it's in the winter when the wind's blowing, and it's always a challenge. We have 2 deployable LMR towers that we can bring if there's a particular incident in an area that has poor coverage. We have pretty good coverage around the state, but of course there are areas that don't have good coverage. We have deployable towers that we can bring to provide an LMR repeater in that individual area to support that incident. Next slide. So with that background, that is our primary role. That is what we at Department of Public Safety do to maintain the networks for us internally, Department of Public Safety for Vermont State Police. We do the same service to maintain networks for AOT, and the Fish and Wildlife wardens use our network. DEC, corrections, all parts of state government that use radios rely on our service and rely on the channels we provide. You'd invited us to talk about FirstNet,
Yep.
and it was I thought it pertinent to give you that background about what we do and what our primary focus is before I kind of move into the FirstNet question. So FirstNet, let me talk about FirstNet briefly. Do we need to pause for a second to give you guys all good?
We're pretty good at
Okay, good.
interrupting as we go along.
Okay.
Yeah.
So FirstNet, in 2004, we had this disaster in the United States, 9/11. We all know that. 9/11 happened before that, but in 2004, the 9/11 Commission, they determined, they looked at that incident, that terrible moment, and they realized that there was a problem, that first responders in New York couldn't talk to each other. The fire people couldn't talk to the police, and the police couldn't talk to the ambulance, and the state, there was a problem. So they recommended that we do some, they recommended that the country create some kind of a nationwide network to allow for interoperable communication. Congress dedicated spectrum is RF spectrum. So when I was talking about our problems in Vermont with UHF and VHF channels being essentially depleted, that same problem, that the RF spectrum is a limited resource. There's only so much RF spectrum, and most of it's being used for something. Congress set aside a specific block of spectrum. That's a very important thing. You can't communicate without RF. You can't have a wireless connection without using RF spectrum. They dedicated a block of that, and they put aside money to do something about it. The government did a very in-depth selection process and tried to find a way to develop some kind of a nationwide interoperability system. Through that selection process, the federal government did this process. The federal government chose to award a partnership agreement with AT&T. AT&T's task is to provide the network for FirstNet. So FirstNet is a government entity. FirstNet itself is a government entity, and FirstNet has a contract with AT&T to build a network that will operate the system.
Only AT&T.
Oh.
Nationwide.
So the FirstNet is a federal government thing, and FirstNet is a nationwide entity. FirstNet, the federal government entity, contracted with AT&T to provide FirstNet service for FirstNet nationwide. When that happened, when that award was made, FirstNet came to all of the states. This Congress created this process. FirstNet came to all the states and said, "You have two choices, state. You can opt into our network, and we will maintain and provide this system and build it out, and we will conduct everything that's needed for that, from building towers, maintaining the network, to providing marketing and offering service to customers. Or you may at your discretion build your own network. You can take the spectrum, you can take your share of the money and build your own network." All states chose to opt in. No states chose to do their own thing.
I had a question about that.
Yeah.
So was that, what year was that? When was the opt-in or build your own?
About 6 years ago.
And so my guess would be that it didn't make a whole lot of financial sense for any state to try to go it on their own, that the AT&T contract was significantly more. Were there logistical reasons, or was it really just all about, you can get a much better rate if you buy into this nationwide AT&T contract?
So I think that I wasn't at public safety then. I wasn't involved in that process. It's hard for me to really talk in depth about that, but I think the fact that 50 states opted in and 0 states opted out kind of talks to that. Can we go to the next slide? I'll get more into that.
Sure. Yeah.
So FirstNet service. What is FirstNet service? Importance. First thing to say, mobile wireless service is a highly competitive market. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, they all are actively courting any customer who they can possibly get on their network. They're also, there's a lot of competition in that market, and they're working on they're always trying to build their network and improve their network, find new spectrum, develop better technologies so you get faster speeds, better coverage. All of these companies are actively always trying to do that. It's very competitive. AT&T has at least 250. They have more than 250 towers in Vermont. It would have been very expensive to build 250 towers. It would be very expensive to operate 250 towers. I can tell you that operating the towers that we have is very expensive and very complicated. So very important statement here. There is no expectation and there is no requirement that FirstNet have universal coverage. There's no no expectation or requirement that FirstNet has universal coverage. Second statement, there's no expectation or requirement that any particular first responder subscribe to FirstNet. If you're a first responder, you can subscribe to FirstNet. You could also subscribe to Verizon or T-Mobile or Boost, Cricket. That's an important distinction. So FirstNet service.
Can I ask you about that very important statement? So it seems contradictory to say that FirstNet is intended to be a universal service, but doesn't have universal coverage.
I don't think there's anything that says that it's intended to be universal.
Well, it's supposed to provide for interoperability for all first responders.
Yes, that is true.
That sounds kind of universal to the lay person.
Yeah.
So anyway, could you talk about that a little bit?
So when I say universal coverage, that means
every nook and cranny of
right,
yeah.
coverage around the entire country. Like there's no expectation that that's a question for the FCC. The FCC has decided that there is no expectation for coverage. Or let me be clear about that. This is a question for the Public Service Department. What are the requirements for companies? I would say that as I understand it, there are rules that the FCC has for coverage requirements, but those rules are very low. Like the have to provide service to not 80% of the people in the country or something. So I don't know what they are, but they're relatively benign. So your question about universal coverage, I was clarifying about what universal coverage means. The percentage of population, the percentage of territory that where service is available. There's no expectation or requirement for universal coverage.
Yeah, but I especially in a hilly place like Vermont, it seems like that's something that we really want first responders to have, to be able to communicate. But I guess they communicate over radio, but they can.
So the last bullet here is that first responder, FirstNet service is available to any eligible first responder. So they can a first responder can go to the AT&T store, any AT&T store, and provide. AT&T stores will market and sell service either under the brand name AT&T, or they will sell service on the FirstNet package.
Say any first responder is eligible?
So any all eligible first responders. So there is
eligible first responder.
There are requirements that they need to demonstrate that they've got some nexus to a first responder entity. My experience has been that AT&T has been, or that FirstNet tries to be very flexible in that, and that anybody that's got a bona fide reason to be on FirstNet, they really try to make that happen. I don't know the details, and you'd have to ask FirstNet.
But geographically, there's no limitation on who can access it. So it works throughout the state.
Yes.
Everywhere.
It works across the country. Anybody who wants to be a any eligible person that's can subscribe to service from FirstNet, and they can avail themselves from using the FirstNet's coverage. FirstNet coverage and AT&T coverage are synonymous, so you can use it wherever there's AT&T coverage.
Excuse me one second.
Yes.
I don't want to hear any comments from guests in the room. I think that's disrespectful. So thank you.
Thank
Representative
you very much.
Morrow?
Sure, thank you very much.
Is the first responder paying for that themselves, or is?
Yes. Excuse me, let me answer that carefully. FirstNet is a company, and they sell service to individuals that buy the service. So someone needs to pay them. First responder, whether the first responder pays for that out of their pocket, or whether the company they work for or the organization they work for, is really between them and the organization. But FirstNet needs to be paid.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Representative Howland?
So FirstNet is a subset of the ATT band, or is it separate, or are
Let me get to the next slide, and I think I'll address that. That's a very, very important question. Can I move on?
Yes, yeah, sorry. We're a
excuse
questioning
me.
committee. Did you have a question, Representative Sibley?
I do.
Okay.
So just because it'll limit other questions that I ask, are you gonna be talking about the kind of when FirstNet was awarded, the granting, the requirements?
Yes.
Or is that an additional testimony we should be looking for?
Let me finish and I think I'll address it.
And
I think,
Yeah, all right.
next slide.
Thanks.
So why would somebody be a FirstNet customer? You're a first responder, you're a volunteer firefighter in Bethel. Why would you do this? So, first of all, remember when I said that FirstNet was awarded, FirstNet award was given by Congress prime spectrum, very important, very lucrative, very capable spectrum. The spectrum that FirstNet was awarded is very, very useful because it travels a long distance and it also goes through buildings well. So it's a very, very important, good spectrum. This prime spectrum is used for both AT&T and FirstNet customers. So if you're an AT&T customer, you get to use this spectrum. If you're a FirstNet customer, you get to use the same spectrum. You don't know it. It happens in the background. You've got your phone, you just pick it up and it works. But at any given moment, your phone might be using the spectrum, the FirstNet spectrum. It might not be, but it might be. FirstNet customers, the primary distinction that FirstNet customers get over AT&T customers is that they have priority and they have preemption. So those are two different concepts. Priority means that if there's congestion, this means if there's congestion in the network, let's just say that you're at the Tunbridge Fair and there's only one signal and it's only one bar, and the teenager next to you is, I'm just going to pick on, she's watching cat videos, and you're a first responder and somebody in trying to dispatch you to go to an event. Your signal, your device will have priority over all of their AT&T devices. Preemption is I'm a little fuzzy about preemption. I think I probably should defer to FirstNet to describe that, but as I understand it, it means that not only do you have priority, but if your call is, you're trying to place a call and there's no capacity, it will drop other calls to make sure that yours gets through. So AT&T and FirstNet customers in Vermont have another benefit from FirstNet. The first primary benefit is primary priority and preemption. The second benefit is that when AT&T chose to come to Vermont, when Vermont opted in to the FirstNet network, AT&T committed to building 35 new towers. So these 35 towers were built in Vermont in areas where generally there was not a lot of great coverage, and the terms that the companies kind of look at, they say that there's a marginal business case for putting in a new tower somewhere. It's very expensive for a company to build a tower, in general, and it's more expensive to build a tower in a rural area. These 35 towers were built in areas that probably, but for this, they would never have been built. So as a result of FirstNet coming here, and of the choice to opt in to the FirstNet network, Vermont benefited with 35 towers that otherwise would not have been built. And so there's coverage in 35 areas around the state, in rural parts of the state, that would not have had coverage but for this. Next slide. So what are the obligations that FirstNet has? So the first obligation, FirstNet, when Vermont opted into the FirstNet deployment, as opposed to building ourselves, right? We were given the opportunity to take whatever, $100 million or something and build our own network, or opt in. When we chose to opt in, I say we, but I wasn't here, but when the state opted in, AT&T committed to constructing 35 towers. They have largely done that. We were given the opportunity to provide input. We didn't specify the individual places. We didn't specify where exactly, but we said we want coverage that covers this area. This is a whole. So we provided input, and that resulted in the 35 towers. AT&T also committed to providing us deployable systems. So those are systems that the state can use for emergent incidents in areas that have poor coverage. We have deployable assets that we can bring to a location to provide coverage in that area where, when there's no coverage. So that's the commitments to the state. AT&T also has commitments to FirstNet. And remember, FirstNet is a federal government agency. It's an entity that is charged with providing this interoperable communications around the country. And their contractor, AT&T is a contractor. I'm pointing to Ryan, but AT&T is a contractor providing a service to FirstNet. They have a contract. That contract is secret. We don't know what's in that contract. It's not a publicly available contract. That we know that contract includes targets for the quantity of the area, the percentage of the country that has coverage. So to get back to Vice Chair, Co-Chair, you asked about coverage.
Yeah.
We know that FirstNet has an agreement with AT&T, and we know that agreement requires a certain level of coverage. We don't know what that is, but we know that there is some agreement there. It's also a requirement that that FirstNet has a requirement of AT&T to achieve a certain quantity of customers, first responder customers in every state around the country. Because AT&T needs to market this on behalf of FirstNet. They need to create a business case they need to create a case for an individual volunteer firefighter to choose to buy FirstNet service as opposed to buying it from Verizon or T-Mobile or Cricket. So AT&T is actively marketing that to those first responders. When a person comes into, in fact, I've seen this myself. I was in a AT&T store and a person came in. I was buying my own phone for my teenager, and a first responder came in and asked about it, and the store clerk steered the first responder customer, once they mentioned that they were a first responder, they steered them to a FirstNet phone as opposed to an AT&T phone. And I found it really compelling that they did that, because the AT&T would have made more money selling the more expensive service as an AT&T branded package, but they steered them to a less expensive package from FirstNet because they knew that they were a first responder. And that first responder had to go through a bit of a hassle to demonstrate that they were a real bona fide. They had to get a letter or something from their chief. I don't remember exactly how that worked, but I remember them going through that. And I'm not versed in that eligibility question. You'd have to ask FirstNet for more information about that.
So why don't we hold that for
I mean, I would just note that, I think AT&T has requirements based on the massive amounts of public funding that they got to hit certain benchmarks. So I'm happy to hear that they're steering them.
That was
towards
just an
service, but
anecdote.
I think it's probably, it serves the customers or the company's interest as well.
I think you're right, because AT&T has commitments to FirstNet. And FirstNet, while they have not told us what these targets are, they told us that AT&T has hit whatever the targets are. So FirstNet reports to us that AT&T has met its requirements under the contract. So it's important to note that both Verizon and T-Mobile, they offer similar first responder packages. And both these companies have told us, they claim that they offer priority and preemption. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that they claim that.
Yeah, so I guess my question is not really for you, it's for AT&T, but I am curious whether the service that they offer, or the promotion that they offer to, let's say, healthcare workers or other first responders, is part of that FirstNet obligation. So the reason I ask is my wife's a doctor. I know when I went into the service recently, that was an option to get some sort of discount for the service based on her being a doctor. And so maybe I can ask you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, so it sounds like we have some questions for AT&T, so.
I think I only have
say,
another slide or two.
Is the plan for you all to come up next?
The reason I ask is because I didn't see your name on the list here, so.
I don't think we have
schedule.
Not invited. Okay, so let's finish your,
I think I might only have a
let's finish
couple
your presentation and then, we will, have AT&T come in maybe to ask some questions when they're on the agenda.
Next slide, please.
Oh, did you travel to be here?
Just from New Hampshire.
Okay,
I think we're happy to answer any questions if there's time and if you have them, but also
Super.
happy to come back.
all right, at this point, there's time. So
I think.
let's let
I'll
you
be
finish
done.
your slides and then maybe you all can come in and identify yourself for the record and we could, I guess, just add them to the agenda.
Yeah, ask Jack to add.
Jack, you can just add them to the agenda. Okay,
So I
Onward.
mentioned that AT&T is part of its commitment to, in the opt-in process, committed to providing deployable sort of devices. So we have AT&T provided us with 5 deployable systems. 3 of them are the larger units on the bottom, and 2 of them are the smaller units on the top. These units have a satellite connectivity, so they're designed to be deployed in areas that don't otherwise have any connectivity. So as an example, we test them at Rumney Elementary School in Middlesex. It's close and there's no cell phone service there. You can bring it there, you set it down, deploy it, hook it up, and now it provides service in an area that otherwise doesn't have service. It provides 2 services. The first is it provides Wi-Fi, simple Wi-Fi connections that we all know at home. We use that. So our first responders have a smartphone. They can connect to the Wi-Fi standing right there, right next to it. Some of our first responders have Verizon service and don't have AT&T, so their smartphone, they connect to the Wi-Fi just standing right next to the device, well, within Wi-Fi range. And other first responders that have FirstNet, this device provides a FirstNet signal, so you can use your FirstNet phone further away. You can use it, a quarter mile down the road or half a mile down the road, depending on what the coverage is for that. So I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide. This is just to give you a picture of the larger ones we attach to they attach to the trailer mount of a vehicle, so it doesn't need a trailer. You just hook it to the hitch on a truck, and you can bring it. We have our pickups, so we bring it in a pickup and deploy it. The smaller ones are suitcases. You just pop them out of the trunk, and we keep them in the trunk of a sedan. Even you pop them out and set them on the ground.
Representative Southwood?
You identified Lumley School as an area with no service. How many other areas do you know of and you've identified that do not have service, especially?
Next slide.
Next slide. Perfect. Thank you.
So coverage is very difficult to assess, and Representative Sibilia will remember that in my former capacity at the PSD, I took over the acronyms, the Public Service Department, I worked on this project. The PSD continues to work on this project. It was a fascinating project.
Hugely important.
Yes, I did the drive testing. Yes, so I worked on the drive testing. This drive, the PSD continues to do drive testing. They're doing one this year, and another update. This shows the way that the drive testing works. The PSD got a set of phones from each of the 6 primary facilities-based carriers. Set the phones with this application on the phone that continually places phone calls. You set up a phone number that will auto answer and say hello, blah 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 blah. What is it that the way you test typing? The big fat fox jumped over the
lazy fox.
Right. So we set up a recording that sent that.
Over the
Right.
lazy dog.
Right.
That's
So we set up a recording with that going over and over again, and we set the phones to call that recording, and it drove along. AOT did the driving on this. So AOT drove all of these roads, and this map shows the results. So the areas that are green had all of the phone calls in that hex. This map on the right shows lots of hexagons. The map on the left is zoomed in around Rumney Elementary in Middlesex. Each of those little hexagons summarizes the results of the phone calls in that hexagon. So you can see there's a lot of red roads. This is showing the results for FirstNet. So you can see that there are a lot of red roads, a lot of roads that don't have red service, that don't have, where voice calls were not successful. This is not my work. This is the Public Service Department's work, and you have to talk to them to get more information about it. I just put this up for reference about your question about universal coverage. it's obvious that there's not universal coverage. That's clear to everyone. No one is confused about that.
Yeah, I guess, folks, my question is whether Vermont has any leverage to get more coverage, especially on primary travel routes. The interstates, Route 2, and come from Johns Bay, and most of the way there's no coverage.
Yeah.
So
I think that this map.
It does show that. I zoomed in. It does show that there's no coverage on Route 2. So do we have any leverage to?
So that is a complicated question, and it's beyond my knowledge. I think you might want to talk to the Public Service Department.
As a user, I think there's a difference in the capability of communicating when you're moving than if you're stationary. And if you stop and listen, do they take those types of tests? So what the real question here is that first responder that's stationary off the main road, aiding somebody, fire, ambulance or whatever, to be able to communicate. Would the communications be better if the recordings were spot made with the communications, the antenna being stationary at an off-road address? Frankly, there's a lot of white area there
that weren't tested.
So what's the assumption of coverage?
I don't think that this tested all of the main roads,
right,
in driving. It would be very difficult so test questions about the PSD's drive test effort are probably best addressed to them. And that question about whether it's in motion or in person, those are nuances that you could get lots of different engineers to give you different answers about that. My sense is that the biggest problem with testing in motion is that you're not testing in one place. Because you're testing, you started the call here and then you ended the call there. And you might have had coverage here, you might have not had coverage at the end.
I guess you got some red spots there on some highways, and I just wondered if you stopped at that point, because emergencies aren't generally moving. So if you stopped at one point, would some of those reds become green, and maybe that's somebody else to test and report.
Yeah. So this test identified many areas around the state that have poor coverage. I think I have one more.
Great. Representative Sabin, do you have a question?
I just want to actually note that drive test, which Director Chase undertook, was really unprecedented at the time, and has helped Vermont understand where things are and where they are not. So, and it was a lot of initiative at the Department of Public Service. They deserve a lot of credit for doing that. Legislature did not ask them to do that. They took that upon themselves. So it was a big deal at the time. Thank you again for doing that.
Thank you, Representative.
Representative Howland.
And do we know the 35 towers that AT&T agreed to put up? Are they tenants on towers where there are other communication companies come in? I refer to the publicly owned, the 3 or 4 of them that go around the country just building communication towers and then attract tenants. It's sort of like building an exit on the interstate. If you build the exit, you'll attract business to the region where they put the interstate exit.
You're right that the basic business model for communication towers is a tenant-based system where a large company, for instance, American Tower or Crown Castle, those are 2 leading companies,
right, yeah.
They will build a tower and then they'll invite others to be tenants. We're actually, in several instances around the state, we have LMR service on towers that are owned by others, for instance, American Tower and Crown Castle. I don't know the answer to your question about those towers. I think that's best addressed to AT&T. I think this is my last slide.
Yep.
So how do we at DPS use mobile wireless? So mobile wireless is essential. It's part of everyday life. It's what we use. We all use it all the time. The main reason that we use it at public safety is for data. We use it for email and text. And we use it as a backup in case we can't use LMR. So there are certain, LMR's got, generally speaking, better coverage around the state than mobile wireless. But there are certainly holes, and there are instances where you get cell phone coverage where we don't have LMR coverage. That does happen. Mobile wireless use, all of our cruisers, all of the 330 odd mobile wireless, I think it's approximately that, for Vermont State Police troopers have cruisers. All of the cruisers are equipped with both Verizon and FirstNet coverage in the cruiser, and there are computers in the cruiser that they can use to access the data networks that we use for criminal justice information in the cruiser. In addition, pretty much all the DPS personnel have a mobile wireless device on the cell phone, and our decision at DPS is basically the same as the rest of the state government, that we allow the individual personnel to choose their provider. So many Vermont State Police DPS employees have FirstNet coverage. Many have service from other providers, and we make that decision because the individuals that are out there on the field, they know what provides best coverage in the territories where they operate, and we afford them the latitude to make a decision that's best for as they see for their operations. So an individual trooper that is constantly in a station and running in St. Albans, they know the territory there, and that decision for them in St. Albans is probably better than a blanket statement around the state. We have, excuse me. We have the FirstNet CRDs, those compact deployables that were provided by FirstNet. Those are, we found them to be essential. We're using them constantly in constant service. One of them is assigned to Vermont Special Teams, and we use them whenever we're at an incident where there's not only no coverage, but marginal coverage, because it's got satellite connectivity, it provides high-speed service. We use it to provide access to data when we're at an incident. And so one is being used by Vermont Special Teams, Vermont State Police Special Teams. The other is being used by the Hazmat USAR team. Urban Hazmat and Urban Search and Rescue are both part of the Division of Fire Safety. So Fire Safety has one of these units, and it's in their vehicle. They're constantly using it. I should note that the cellular industry, including all of the cell companies, but also the manufacturers that make the equipment for the cell industry. Apple makes, their cell phones. Samsung makes their cell phones. There's all of the infrastructure that goes in the back end. They're actively looking at trying to make LMR work over the LTE infrastructure. It's been a dream for a long time, and it is an active part of that industry. That technology exists, as I mentioned. There are many first responders, even Vermont, small fire departments. Instead of building their own LMR network and putting up a repeater on the fire station, they just get a cell phone and they can install a first responder app on their phone, and they can get a talk group and something. Excuse me.
I'm so sorry.
Are you okay?
I am fine. Excuse me?
Okay.
I'm fine.
Okay.
Yes, that was a massive cough sneeze.
Oh.
Forward we go.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Do you need pause? That's okay.
I'm good.
So these applications exist. Small, especially small fire departments use them. An application on a smartphone instead of using LMR. It's sort of a cheap way to go about it. There are there's a wide range in those applications. I'm not prepared to really talk in depth about it, but that is an area of technology. LMR coverage, especially in rural areas, is generally judged to be better than LTE coverage. And as a result, we expect LMR coverage, LMR systems will be, we expect them to be essential for first responders for many years to come. So that concludes my presentation about the DPS technology and FirstNet technology, and I can answer questions if you have more.
Great. I just want to do a little time management here. So Are Daniel and Rosemary, are you here to support or do you have additional testimony?
Most of the support, if I could just add one piece,
For the record,
if you wouldn't mind, my name is Dan Batesy. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Public Safety.
thank you.
It's just very easy to conflate land mobile radio and cellular technology. And I'm a simple guy. Before I was Deputy Commissioner, I was a paramedic firefighter, and that's my whole career for 35 years of being the guy at the end of that radio that has to push the button when he's in trouble. And I have not nearly the knowledge that Corey has in terms of how that works. But suffice to say, was relying upon using it for everything. When we talk about FirstNet, we're not talking about a system that is designed to replace land mobile radio. If you look at the landscape of public safety folks working in Vermont right now, it is primarily a land mobile radio system that they rely upon. It is a radio that they're using to communicate with dispatch. It's the radio they're using to communicate with one another. Systems like FirstNet and also Verizon and other cellular services are typically laid over that to supplement and augment that process. And indeed, we use it to augment it in a lot of ways. VSP uses it to connect data and things like that, but it was never intended to replace that, or at least not now. Maybe in the future it will. But oftentimes it gets really murky between those two to say, well, how come it's not better? How come it's not more prevalent? How come it's not? And I think that the simple answer is because so many services rely primarily on that land mobile radio system as their proximal means.
I do, that's helpful to me, and I do have a question about that. You were getting right toward my underlying question. So the land mobile radio network is the backbone. FirstNet is intended to be supplemental. The part I was not understanding in my mind as we were talking was, why would that be up to the individual first responder? I was envisioning more that an entire department would purchase it for all, make a decision kind of, we're gonna do FirstNet and we're gonna cover the costs and we're all gonna have it.
Yeah.
So the individual thing, I'm not understanding how that works.
I think very often it does work that way. I think there are plenty of departments in Vermont. I used to be the EMS chief for the Department of Health, and there are plenty of EMS services that did it exactly that way. They applied as a service, they bought a certain number of phones, they handed them out to their employees, and that's how it went. I think, I can't speak, I wasn't here in Vermont when the original agreements were made, so I can't tell you exactly what that discussion was. I think it's mostly about freedom and local control and things that you're quite familiar with here of why those decisions were made. But, the idea is, and I think Corey hit another very important point, there are places in Vermont where AT&T works terrific and it's the best service, but there are also places in Vermont where it doesn't. And I think it's important for us, at least, especially in Department of Public Safety, to acknowledge that, because if we have a trooper that lives in a place where AT&T does not have good coverage, we want them to use Verizon or whoever does have the good coverage in that area. So I think that's a piece of it.
Thank you. Rep. Southworth?
Maybe a combined question for Deputy Commissioner and the Director. Are the systems in place now sufficient enough to keep first responders safe?
Well, that's a pretty loaded question. And I don't mean to obfuscate. The answer is we could always be safer. And I think anyone who's working in this system will point out that there are certainly holes and there are certainly ways that we could do better. And as Corey mentioned, that's exactly the work of that Public Safety Communications Task Force, to step back and take a look at the system as a whole and to try to determine what the best pathway forward is. If you want to talk about specifics, we can talk about specifics, but I think it's probably the best answer is just to say, yeah, we could always be better.
Thank you.
I think we can invite them in and hear a little bit more about this. Representative Howland, and then we should get AT&T if they're willing to.
With the breakdown of the two points of public response, Williston and Westminster, are there more gaps in the LMR system, or potentially more gaps in the LMR system when you're trying to communicate from the other side of the western side of Vermont to two systems, or perhaps the two communication systems are interlinked, A and B, so that if a B group can't reach the B dispatch, that it goes to is heard by the A group and communications is connected?
So I think, let me answer it this way. The systems in the two PSAPs in Westminster and Williston are mirrored, and they both have the capability of, any individual telecommunicator in any of the two PSAPs has the ability to transmit on any of the 35 towers in the state. So if we have a problem, if something goes down in Westminster, Williston can easily take care of it, or vice versa.
Okay, it was the local complaints when they went from the 4 to the 2 is still reverberating.
Right. Thank you very much
You're welcome.
for coming in.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yes,
It's
and
an important topic.
it is, as we continue our learning journey. And maybe we could invite you guys to come up and make sure before you go that Jack knows how to, your name and title so we can add that to our
Sure.
agenda for
What's
the
that?
day.
Yeah, just spell your names and all that.
Okay.
Thanks for the impromptu.
No problem. Happy to be here. Good morning. My name is Ryan Clark, RyanClark. I am the Director of External Affairs for AT&T in Northern New England. I cover Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Live over in Manchester, New Hampshire, so not too far away.
And I'm Nick Sherman. I'm with Leonine Public Affairs, and we're right here in Montpelier. And we represent AT&T.
Great. All right, so people have questions for AT&T, I think.
Sure, yeah, well, so I was wondering about how AT&T's services sort of interconnect, you might say, with FirstNet. So as I mentioned earlier, we get some sort of discount because my wife's a doctor. Is that a FirstNet kind of discount, or can you explain how this?
Sure, and I think the best place to start is to talk about a bit about Representative Sebelia's question around eligibility, who's eligible. So we have two types of FirstNet subscribers. You have primary subscribers and extended primary subscribers. Primary subscribers are your primary first responders, police, fire, EMS. And then we have extended primary, which could include hospitals. It even includes your plow companies, anybody who supports a primary public safety operation. So that's kind of the differentiation between the two. And they are both eligible to be FirstNet customers. It's just the only difference is a primary is always on FirstNet. So your police department, your fire department, if they are a FirstNet customer, would always have priority in preemption, no matter the situation. They're always going to be, whether, as Corey mentioned, a fare or an emergency situation, they're always going to have that access to the priority in preemption on our network. And commercial users, unless they're calling 911, would effectively take a back seat. Extended primary users are, if there is a large situation, can be uplifted, and that's the terminology we use. It's called being uplifted as a FirstNet user, and then they, as a result of being uplifted, have access to priority and preemption on the network for the time period that they have been uplifted onto the network. So again, if you were to have your plow services in your town during a significant snowstorm or an emergency where roads need to be cleared specifically for police to get to pointing to, or the fire department to get to the fire, the plow service would be uplifted. So they have priority and preemption. And as they're working with the department to get them wherever they need to go or to clear the streets, they have their priority and preemption. And when that incident is over, they would go back to being a normal customer, and then the cycle would continue.
Yeah, okay, that's clear, thank you. So how is this marketed to the customer?
Sure, it's marketed as its own product. So it is.
So there's two separate things?
Correct, yeah, we have FirstNet sales, effectively. FirstNet, we call it mobility or client relations, but they are their own team. And then you have your retail stores and your retail team and your commercial team who market the commercial product. And again, this terminology is commercials, you or I, or anybody who is not a first responder. and they would do their marketing to their commercial customers. The FirstNet team does their marketing to first responders.
Who does the people in between here,
So retail,
the secondary, first, whatever, I forget.
oh, that would be all under the FirstNet sales team.
Okay.
They would include extended primary in their parameters effectively. And the retail teams would do both. So if you walk into a store, as we've said, a first responder walks into a store, they want to inquire about FirstNet, they would be able to talk to the sales team. They're all trained. They all know how to sell FirstNet and get them on the proper plan, but they would also be able to sell to commercial users. So retail covers both. Hopefully that answers the
Yeah, I
question.
think so, yeah, okay, so this discount for, I don't know what services it covers, just happens my wife's a doctor.
Mhm.
Is that part of this extended primary then?
I would have to learn more about the conversation, but my understanding is yes, that it
Okay.
sounds like
Okay.
she would have been part of the extended primary FirstNet program.
Okay. So that's when anybody who goes in and says, I'm a doctor, I work on rescue, whatever it is,
Right.
they would be guided towards that service.
Correct, and as Corey mentioned, they would have to authenticate that they are a public safety, because we go through audits.
Yeah.
So the FirstNet Authority,
Yeah.
our governing agency who we are a contractor with, they audit our subscribers
Right.
to make sure that the individuals are actually part of public safety. So that way, it's just
Right,
it's
so
all-
I was just trying to understand how this affects customers generally and, okay, good, thanks.
Representative Sibilia, and then Howland, and then I've got a question.
Two questions, and I'll give them both to you.
Okay.
The first question is, how much was AT&T paid by taxpayer dollars for the FirstNet system generally in the US? And the second question is, I heard you talk about auditing, but who regulates for service, function, like who do you answer to?
Mhm.
And in the state
So
and federally?
in the state, we've worked with the Department of Public Safety often.
Who regulates you in the state?
I don't know if we have a state regulator. I'd have to double check on who would regulate us at the state level. At the national level, it's the federal agency that we are contracted to provide the service to. So they manage and monitor the contract and the number of subscribers we have, and make sure that we're delivering on the number of towers we've built and promised to. For example, when in 2018, when the state opted in and those 38 towers Corey mentioned, we had a date by which we had to deliver on the contract and say, yes, state of Vermont and federal authority, you told us to go build these 38 towers. State, we took your input on where to go to those locations. Here is proof that we did do both of them, that we did build out those towers. So that's an example of how they have kind of governed and looked at, regulated us.
Well, we just for the committee's purposes, my question is more around, we've heard about utilities and, they're regulated for rates and different things. Are you regulated for rates? Does anybody regulate your rates, or are you regulated by the market?
The federal government would be the ones, and I don't think they regulate exactly how much we would be able to rate customers, but because we do have a requirement in our contract for X number of customers by X dates, and these dates continue out. So this is a 25-year contract with the federal government. So by certain dates, we have to hit benchmarks. As a result of that, we're incentivized to hit those benchmarks, so we're keeping our rates. I think that's kind of how it gets controlled.
Okay. And then the other question was, how much did AT&T receive for the national FirstNet contract? And Madam Chair, I have a lot of questions here that I bet you we're not going to get to. I don't know.
We probably won't, because I have some questions too.
Yeah, I don't know if we can have them back at some point.
I'm sure we could. So why
anytime.
don't you,
That was my question.
Okay. So the second question, the FirstNet Authority was created, again, out of the 9/11 Commission. And a bit of this, I would prefer to have the FirstNet Authority talk to some of their creation and some of how they were developed, because that wasn't necessarily AT&T's role, because FirstNet Authority received they have funding that they provided to AT&T to do the the original build out. I think I have that number here. I want to make sure. So there,
Specifically, I'm always interested in public investment, public accountability. And so just wanting to understand how much you received and who is holding you accountable and for what.
sure. So the FirstNet Authority was created with $6.5 billion. Again, I would prefer that they talk about how they were created in their funding. Not all of that money went to AT&T. That was part of it pays for their salaries, pays for the department to be spun up and do all the research and coordinate with public safety across the nation, which they do. I don't know how much of that $6.5 billion that AT&T receives specifically to go build, for example, the 35 towers. Be happy to try to get that information for you. But that funding, again, I would prefer the FirstNet Authority to talk about this, but my understanding is that funding came as a result of spectrum auction. And that's an important piece of this puzzle, is that the FirstNet Authority is not funded by, again, I would prefer that they talk about this, but my understanding that they are not funded by taxpayer dollars. They are funded by spectrum auction. So what happens is, as Corey was alluding to at times, the spectrum is a very important piece of how wireless communication services work. They are extremely expensive resource.
Who owns the spectrum?
The FirstNet Authority owns the Band 14 spectrum.
Well, that was auctioned.
I don't know exactly which spectrum, but yeah, that would be public information.
Yeah, I would say the distinction between raising money through the sale of public property versus taxes is
sure
meaningful, but
sure.
Ultimately the public is paying.
Sure, and then again, I would say that yes, the companies paid for the spectrum, and then that funding, part of it in part went to the FirstNet Authority to create, again, the $6.5 billion. What another piece though is if you're looking at so going forward, I said there's a 25 contract started somewhere around 2017. We began building in 2018. There is going to be continued investment across the country and across the state of Vermont. So this contract again is ongoing. There will be reinvested funds that go to new towers, and we'll work with the Department of Public Safety, and it's going to be input from departments and public safety agencies. That funding for the reinvestment comes from AT&T leasing the Band 14 spectrum directly from the FirstNet Authority. Mm-hmm. So we, the AT&T company, is paying the FirstNet Authority for using the Band 14 spectrum that FirstNet customers have access to. And so that's where that reinvestment funding is coming into place. So to try to answer some of your questions.
You weren't asked to
also part of that.
So.
Yeah, I don't have any slides or anything. I was
That's
just
fine.
Listening. Yeah.
Great. So I have a question, I think.
No, I'm going to defer.
Okay, and Rep Morrow has a question, and then if we'd like to get you back with some preparation, we can do that. My question is probably super basic, but I always like to bring things right down. So what I've learned today, I think at a very basic level, this being a new topic to me, is that it sounds to me like we have a publicly funded underlying LMR network that is paid for by Vermonters, I assume, and that provides the background of our first responders communications network. And then, as created by the federal government, the FirstNet Authority was established to provide a supplemental wireless band or spectrum on which first responders have priority, and they can buy that if they want to. So that's where we get away from a publicly funded network to basically a public-private partnership, a contract that was awarded to a for-profit business, AT&T. So that's where we get into murky areas about regulation. Mm-hmm. You guys are abiding by the terms of your contract that you signed with the government, but it is not regulated in the way that we think of utilities being regulated or other other areas being regulated. Did I get all that right?
That's, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Rep. Morrow?
I'm interested in this last piece that you mentioned. This might be a question for the commissioners of where we're going from here in terms of investing in creating a more robust system. Is there a plan for that we can look at?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great question. There is, so again, I would defer a bit to the FirstNet Authority, but I can talk to it. So this project started in 2018. We had 5 years to build out those towers, as Corey mentioned. That took us to 2023. Going forward, we are continuing to build and work on the network and maintain it. There's going to be another round of reinvestment. Last year, the FirstNet Authority announced that there's going to be about $2 billion nationwide available for network-specific reinvestment. And so they are going through a process of working with each state to have conversations about where the state, and this is the conversation between the FirstNet Authority and the state, not AT&T, where the FirstNet Authority is going to talk to the state about where the state continues to see needs from a wireless public safety communication standpoint. The state and FirstNet Authority can have those conversations and back and forth, and then the FirstNet Authority will dictate to AT&T, the contractor, where they would like us to go build additional cell towers for them. So
what's the general time frame for that process?
I would have to defer to the FirstNet Authority because they are the ones who are going to tell us when it is okay to build those towers with those reinvestment dollars.
And the state has advisory input there.
Correct. The state will be working, again, primarily DPS or Department of Public Service. Either of the DPSs will be, they have been involved. They were very involved in the first 5 years of the contract, and I believe that they would be involved with working with the FirstNet Authority to have those conversations. I have seen the tool that they're using to get feedback from the states, and it's a very advanced online system that they're using, and they're identifying locations in each state, and then they're going to say to the states, this is where we've identified based off of critical infrastructure, roads, hospitals, lack of coverage based off of the network maps that they have access to. And they're going to show that to the states. States are then going to be able to say, yes, and here's some additional information about what we see the needs are for. So that's going to be an example of how that conversation is going to go. And I preface that all by saying we're the AT&T contractor side. FirstNet Authority is the one going to be having those conversations with the state. So if you have additional questions about that timeline and everything, that would have to come from the FirstNet Authority, and that's kind of my understanding of the process as the AT&T contractor side.
I think we have time for one more
All right,
question.
so what I'm hearing is that Director Chase said something about coverability or this mapping or results is not available for reporting. FirstNet Authority or commissions are reporting, but the information isn't coming to the state. And then I sort of heard over here that there is some sort of reporting that's going to be reported. I'm confused as to this first link and the federal authority down to the state levels, and mostly I think they're concerned about the local first responders, not the type of communications on a statewide organization like a state police. I'm more talking about the constable to local fire department coverage in local districts.
Do either of you have a thought on that?
I think from my presentation, if I remember right now, in my presentation, I said that there are obligations that AT&T has to FirstNet pursuant to its contract with the quantity of customers and the quantity of territory that it needs to cover. we don't know what those obligations are. That's between AT&T and FirstNet. And that gets back to Ryan at AT&T. He mentioned that the questions that you got here seem to be really focused on that relationship, and really neither of us are in a position to answer that. That's a FirstNet authority question. It's a federal, FirstNet Authority is a federal entity, and we don't know, we're not privy to that contract. We at the state are not privy to those details.
I think.
Okay.
Well, for instance,
If you
the
have a
quantity of,
question- Okay, not an interjection. Okay, let's,
Question.
yeah, let's be respectful.
Okay, question.
Do you have a question?
I do.
Okay, Representative Sebelius.
You are not privy to the contract.
the contract, to be specific, the contract that I'm talking about is what Mr. Ryan from AT&T expressed. The FirstNet Authority is a federal entity. The FirstNet Authority has a contract with AT&T in which they lay out, we expect you to build this many towers, we expect you to provide this amount of coverage, we expect you to achieve this many customers. That is a relationship, a commercial relationship between the FirstNet Authority and AT&T. That's, it's a confidential document between the two of them. You'd have to talk to the two of them about that. We don't know that.
My
And I
confusion
defer to
was,
my deputy commissioner, I think he might have.
No, that's exactly right.
yeah, I mean, my confusion was, I thought I heard you say that either the state or AT&T, you know, would be able to speak to this. We'd have to talk to FirstNet, and yet the network is operated in the state by AT&T. So,
I guess I'm talking about the commercial relation, those targets, the targeted quantity of customers, the amount of money, all of those questions are between those two entities, not, the state has really nothing to do with that.
One last quick question, and that is, who at the state level is communicating with the FirstNet Authority regarding this next, I think you said $2 billion that's available for enhancing the network? Who at the state level, perhaps the deputy commissioner?
Yeah, well, so two things. One is we have the communications task force that's just finishing up their initial steps of creating the statewide report. That will be a piece of it. And then we haven't really started the second piece of it. So it's probably, the answer is I don't know yet. But I do know that, as we mentioned, DPS is deeply involved, Department of Public Service is deeply involved. And I think as that initiative becomes more realistic and in front of us, we'll dig in.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, everybody, for coming. It sounds like if we want to learn more about FirstNet, we can put some thought into who we might have in for additional questions, because we have time to do that. So